Hi, I'm Jonathan Weiner, and welcome to Are You Listening? It's a series where you can learn about the art of mastering audio, and to some extent the science. So let's get started. You've probably heard people discussing the difference between mastering in a room with speakers, or using speakers in a room, and dealing with room acoustics, versus working in headphones. And you've probably heard people talk about how it's either not a good idea to rely exclusively on headphones, and some people like to assert that maybe it is a good idea because the majority of listeners, or some significant number of listeners, consume music and listen to music on headphones. So what's the truth of that? Well, the fact of the matter is, I think in most people's estimation, if you create a great sounding mix and a great sounding master on speakers, it will translate pretty well to headphones. The converse isn't necessarily true. If you create a great sounding master on headphones, there are things that we can do in headphones because of the control and because of the nature of the signals, the way that the signals get from the little drivers into your ear and into your brain, that allows you to wander into making certain kinds of decisions and adjustments that won't necessarily translate to speakers. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to navigate some of those challenges and how to think about staying away from making some common mistakes that you might make when listening in headphones. It makes a lot of sense that people are working in headphones for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is, well, if you're listening in headphones, you won't bother the neighbors. But if you don't have a lot of sound in a room, you can avoid the problems that come with working in an imperfect environment. And there's a recognition that having a great sounding room like this one is something that costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to build it. Not everybody can or necessarily should justify the expense of creating an environment like this. So sometimes people work in headphones by necessity. It's important for you to think about the headphones that you're going to use when you're working in headphones. And in fact, you don't only want to think about the headphones, you want to think about the entire playback chain. By that I mean you've got a D to A converter. It's the thing that converts the data into an analog signal. You've got an amplifier that's built into the D to A converter and playback device, your audio interface. And you've also got the headphones themselves. So I'm going to break it down a little bit and talk about each aspect of the playback chain. Some audio interfaces use a little 1/8-inch mini connector, and some use a 1/4-inch connector. They are functionally basically the same, but they do indicate something different about the kinds of signals that are coming out of those connectors. 1/8-inch connectors usually have lower voltage and less headroom. The analog section of those devices is built in such a way that they won't deliver the same quality as something that's got a 1/4-inch output. It has to do with the design considerations about the small form factor versus the larger form factor, but it's something to be aware of. It's not to say that you can't use the 1/8-inch output from your laptop, but it's probably not ideal. It's probably better to rely on an interface. Headphones have something called an impedance rating, which relates to the efficiency, which also relates to the quality of the amplifier that we use to drive the headphones. If you have a pair of headphones that's rated with a very low impedance, which also might have one of these 1/8-inch connectors, you probably will be okay playing out of a phone or an 1/8-inch jack on a laptop. But some headphones have a higher impedance, and that requires a stronger amplifier, a higher voltage to drive them, and a different impedance relationship. So it's important to understand what the impedance rating of your output is, and also what the impedance rating of your headphones is. This is a pair of headphones made by a manufacturer named Beyer. They actually manufacture this model with different impedance ratings, which you can decide whether you're going to get the high impedance rating, which is generally set up so you can use a great headphone amplifier, or if you get the low impedance, which will work better with some device that's equipped with an 1/8-inch jack. There are other variations on the headphone theme. There are wireless headphones, earbuds, and so on. It's generally a good idea to stay away from wireless headphones for the main reason that they use a technology called Bluetooth. And Bluetooth will transmit audio in a way that's lossy. And when we're mastering, we want to make sure that there's no technology that's getting in between us and the bits, so to speak. Wireless headphones are to be avoided. Anything that uses any kind of noise reduction or cancellation also to be avoided, because there will be some DSP, some digital signal processing, that will alter the sound that we're hearing, and you're not going to get as accurate a depiction of your music. I have another pair of headphones here. These are headphones that are both excellent for mastering. The thing that they have in common is that they are somewhat open-backed. And the reason that open-backed headphones are recommended for critical listening is that they image better, and you, generally speaking, stand a chance of designing a headphone that will give you a truer low-frequency response. Some headphones that you might use to cut vocals, where you want to make sure that you have a closed back to it, not ideal for mastering. Lots of different models, lots of different manufacturers that make great open-backed headphones, but that's one of the attributes that I recommend that you look for. One of the things you'll also hear people talk about when they talk about best practices for mixing, listening, and especially mastering is listening at a consistent playback level. 85 dB SPL, approximately, depending on your room size and other conditions, is the recommended average playback level when you're listening. It's easy to measure that in speakers. It's really hard to measure that in headphones. It's especially important when you're thinking about mastering in headphones to establish your playback level using references. Find your mastering reference playlist, whatever it happens to be, your favorite 5 to 8 tracks that sound great in a genre. Listen to your playlist, not loudness normalized. If you want to know more about that, there's an Are You Listening episode for you. So listen not loudness normalized, and then set your playback level and try to leave it in the position at a comfortable listening level, and don't go back and fiddle with it. Again, it's hard to measure the level. Try not to listen too loud for too long. You will damage your ears, and I don't want that to happen. The two issues that I think are hardest to calibrate yourselves to when you're thinking about mastering in headphones are the extensions of the spectrum, especially dealing with low-end signals, and also the notion of the stereo image. And the reason for that, at least in part, is that you can generate a lot of very low frequency information in headphones, and sometimes it sounds and feels really good. It's the kind of information that can cause a speaker, if it tries to reproduce very low frequency signals, to misbehave. The imaging issue is kind of similar. It's possible to create a very, very wide stereo image, and you can still kind of pick up what's happening in the center of the image, the lead vocal, the main character in a mix. And then when you go to listen to it in speakers, you actually end up with some masking behavior that happens between the sound that's coming from the stereo image and the signal that's coming from the center. If you've watched my mid-side video, you'll understand that it's a little bit counterintuitive. If you exaggerate the sides, it means you're de-emphasizing the thing that you want people to really pay greatest attention to, the lead instrument, the kick drum, the snare drum, etc. So these are two arenas where I think it's easiest to wander into troublesome territory. Again, this is about music, it's about art, you're free to make all the decisions that you want to make. But as mastering engineers, we're also concerned about translation. We want to make sure that everybody who listens to the tracks that we're creating is going to have as good an experience as possible of the music. There are a couple of things that we can do, a couple of tools that we can use to keep us from wandering into the danger zone, if you will. The first one that you see is a tool called Tonal Balance Control. Now, this is a software tool that you can use to measure your audio against reference audio, the reference built from thousands of tracks that were averaged to give you a sense of best practices. It's especially helpful to understand the relationship between the low end of the track that we're working on and what is typical. And actually, if you look at any of the genre curves here, you will notice that one of the things that they have in common is that they roll off below 100 hertz. So that tells you something about the shape of well-produced audio, the shape of the bass that is typical. It also will tell you something about the physics of music. There's not a lot of musical energy or information below 40 hertz or 50 hertz. So you'll usually see the signals roll off below that. So I'm going to hit play.
What it's like to have a dream come true. If I never know I can live through you.
You have to wait for the signal to settle. Maybe give it 5, 6, 7 seconds to take an average across a track. And you can see in this track that the low end is close to the high line of what is typical, and the very top end is a little bit underneath. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to make adjustments, but at least I've got a little bit of a diagnosis, something to think about, and I would be not so inclined to radically increase the very deep bass beyond this. So this is giving me a little bit of protection, if you will, a recommendation. The other thing that you can do is use frequency soloing to understand what's going on in the low end. By hitting Option click, and this is on a Mac, I'm soloing the region right around 80 Hertz, and you can hear that there's a component of the kick drum and the note of the bass that's present as I sweep down. There's the very bottom of the kick drum. We're at 50 Hertz. And as I keep sweeping down, you really don't hear anything change. In fact, you hear the sound kind of decrease a little bit. That's a way of reinforcing the idea that there's not that much musical energy down there. And if you find yourself in headphones exaggerating the low end, like what you're seeing on the screen here, probably not doing yourself any favors. You're creating something that won't necessarily contain more true bass or more audible bass. And for those listeners who are listening using smaller speakers or earbuds or something, their drivers may start to misbehave because you're adding so much of that low end. So it may feel really great in your really nice mastering headphones, but you may be pushing the low end too far. As far as the stereo imaging piece goes, in this case, you might want to use an imaging meter to help you understand the relationship between the center and the side information. So on the screen here, I've got a tool called Insight. I've pulled up the sound field module in the Lysigis mode. Lysigis, a Lysiju, it actually refers back to the old days when we used to use oscilloscopes in studios to portray the mono versus out of phase or phase different, polarity different signals. So when you look at the screen, you see the orientation is largely vertical. If I were to increase the out of phase component, the side signal, dramatically, and let me do that here. I'm going to pull up the dynamics module, put it in mid-side mode, make sure that they are decoupled, which they are. Okay, so now I've completely turned down the center channel, or the correlated information. And now if you look at the Lysigis mode, you see it's got this horizontal orientation. That indicates a problem. I've clearly got too much phase different information. When you're looking at a meter like this, you usually want to see the orientation be largely vertical with occasional excursions out to the side. Obviously, there are shades of difference. It's not all or nothing, not all horizontal or all vertical. But if you start to see the shape of the meter start to wander out more towards like a round ball of fuzz, you're probably using too much stereo width and too much stereo widening. One way that you can also avoid wandering into that territory, if you were to use something like a stereo imager, is to make sure that you only add width to the mid-range and above. That way, at least, you're avoiding ripping apart the mono signal or the center of the stereo image in the bass and in the body of the sound that you're working with. There are scenarios where mastering in headphones or listening in headphones is advantageous. Going back to the comment I made about rooms and room acoustics, one of the difficult things about room design and building a high-performance room is getting low-frequency accuracy, being able to actually even sometimes hear the low end in a recording. It's not so hard to do that with headphones because we've eliminated the room. So that's kind of cool. That's helpful. That's advantageous. The second advantage that I'd call out is in the arena of what I'm going to call QC or QA, quality control, making sure that there's nothing in a recording that's a problem. When you're listening in a noisy environment, sometimes it's not only hard to differentiate between the ambient noise and the noise in a recording, but sometimes tiny little noises can escape your attention. In headphones, they're less likely to escape your attention. If you look back at quality control engineers working in mastering studios back in the day, you would see that many of them would actually work in headphones because they would stand a better chance at catching flaws, and that was really the entire gig. Given that it is clearly different listening to speakers and headphones from the standpoint of crossfeed, there are D-to-A converters and interfaces and even some software plugins that incorporate a crossfeed function. And they work fairly well to simulate that notion of crossfeed, to give you a sense of what the image is going to sound like when you're listening in headphones or when you're listening in speakers. I also recommend in general when you're choosing audio interfaces, do some reading on the internet, find interfaces where people talk about the excellence of the D-to-A section, the digital to analog section, and the playback quality. So those are a couple of ideas, a couple of strategies that you can use to help, again, keep you out of the danger zone. Ultimately, find yourself a good pair of headphones, find yourself a good set of references, spend a lot of time listening so you understand what good stereo imaging sounds like, what the tonal balance sounds like, and avoid going to the extremes. Again, it's kind of easy to make something sound cool and fun in headphones, but it won't necessarily translate when you go to play it back for your audience in speakers, in a car, or all the other environments they might be listening. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Are You Listening? I hope you've learned a little something about working with headphones that you can use to improve your practice. Please remember, go to the iZotope.com website. There's lots of learning assets there. Also, please subscribe to this series so that when a new video comes out, you'll be notified and you can learn just a little bit more about mastering audio. Thanks for watching.